Welcome. Thank you all for being here. We're honored and grateful to have you with us. We're also grateful to everyone here at Scoville Zoo for hosting us. My name is Matt Meacham. I'm a program manager with Illinois Humanities, based in our southwestern office in Edwardsville. We're a nonprofit organization that serves as the Illinois affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. On the back of your program is a description of who we are and what we do. If any of that interests you, please talk with me or one of the other Illinois Humanities staff members who are here. Paul DeRica, our Director of Programs, and Elliot Heilman, our Program Manager for Public Policy, who's waving from the back of the room enthusiastically. I thank them for their help as well. This event is part of a series called The Country and the City, Common Ground in the Prairie State. The series consists of text-based panel discussions with audience participation about issues that affect both urban and rural Illinois communities. The complex, sometimes tense relationship between Illinois' major cities and its rural areas has been a significant theme throughout its history, from long before it became a state 2 centuries ago up to the present. Each program in this series has a rural version and an urban version, and we hope to generate communication between the community where the rural version happens and the one where the urban version happens. On your way in, you received a card containing 2 questions. Actually, it's a slip of paper. I meant for it to be a card. Sorry about that. But you received a slip of paper tucked in your program with 2 questions. We invite you to write your answers and return the cards to us after the discussion. We'd like to share them with the people who will attend the rural version of this event in a few weeks in DuQuoin, a small town in southern Illinois. The subject of this evening's discussion is media coverage of urban and rural communities and its effects on perceptions of those communities, and how to overcome detrimental publicity and create positive civic momentum. We're honored to have 5 thoughtful panelists with us to help us address these topics. Their biographical information appears in your program. We hope you'll participate in the conversation too. All opinions are welcome, including opinions that might differ from those expressed by the panelists. We just encourage you to treat others as you would wish to be treated. It's a privilege to introduce the moderator of this discussion, Kelly Covey, principal of the Covey Group in Chicago. Kelly is widely respected for her skill in leading discussions of complex subjects. She's knowledgeable about social issues affecting cities, but familiar with rural culture also. She's both deeply insightful and deeply caring. Please welcome Kelly Covey. We have 1 microphone on this side and 1 microphone on that side. So if you would just sort of pass among the 3 of you, that would be great.
Thank you so much, Matt. And thank you for turning out, and thank you to all the panelists for coming. I've had a chance to talk to them all last week as we were preparing, so I'm really looking forward to this discussion. And I was sharing that as I interviewed them beforehand, it's been really interesting to see the patterns that have emerged in both cities and towns across the state, so I'm looking forward to illuminating that tonight. I also just want to say this program has really been a dream for me. I grew up in a very small town in Texas, and since then I left after college. I've lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan, Buffalo, New York, Devils Lake, North Dakota, a very small rural town, and then Chicago for the last 16 years. And I've always sort of thought that it was possible for people in small towns and big cities to be in conversation about these issues. So it's really been thrilling to do this series. We started in September, did a lot of different topics, and so it's been a lot of fun. I want to start this topic of media representation and sustaining positive civic momentum, just by giving everybody a chance to introduce themselves. What I'm going to ask each of you to do is just to say your name, where you're from, your role there, and what you have, how long you've been living there. And if Marshall, I could start with you, that would be wonderful.
My name is Marshall Jones. I'm from Kewanee, Illinois in Henry County. I'm the chairman of the county board there. I've been in Kewanee for 34 years. And my background is a sort of opposite of Kelly's. I was born and raised in Chicago, and I've traveled around many small towns ever since I left in 1970.
I'm Molly Parker. I'm a reporter for the Southern Illinois newspaper. I'm in Carbondale, Illinois, and I grew up in Southern Illinois, and after that, I went and lived in a few other places. I reported in Illinois, in Peoria, in South Carolina, in North Carolina, in Mississippi, and then ended up back home because I love Southern Illinois.
That was beautiful. Terrence Taylor, born and raised here in Decatur, Decaturin. Radio personality for over 16 years now. So veteran, a young veteran. For the school district, I'm a family support coordinator, so I make sure that the families and the students have the resources that they need, or access to the resources that they need within our community.
My name is Sarah McGivney. I am the Executive Director of Alton Main Street. And if you're not familiar with the Main Street program, in short, it is a program by the National Trust for Historic Preservation to breathe new life into downtown districts that were kind of, everyone fled during the 70s and 80s during the boom of the shopping malls and strip malls and suburbs and everything. So I spend my time planning cultural and economic activity and social activity in downtown Alton, Illinois. I was born and raised there. I moved away to go to college at Illinois State University. Lived in Kansas City for a few years, and then lived in St. Louis for a few years. And when I went to lay down roots, I looked back across the river. That's where Alton is, right across the river from St. Louis, and went and bought my home in Alton.
Good evening. My name is John Groh. I'm the president of the Rockford Area Convention and Visitors Bureau. We're the destination marketing organization for Rockford and our surrounding area of Winnebago County. I have been in my current role for 10 years. I was born and raised, went away for college, went to school in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and came back, and have been back now for a total of 20 years. I said that earlier tonight. I thought, wow, I don't know that I've said that out loud. But this is the 20th anniversary of my college graduation, so yeah, that's a big, I guess, milestone, and enjoying it. And my wife and I live there with our 3 boys.
Thank you so much. So we're going to jump into this topic, but first I just want to sort of reiterate what Matt said. I anticipate this will be fairly informal, that if you have questions or you have comments from the audience, please feel free to raise your hand and we'll try to make sure that you get in. The only request I have is to be aware of time. I'll say it to panelists too, just to be aware of how much time you're taking up so that we can get everybody in. And also just to be aware of listening to things even if you don't agree. I think that's probably the most important thing, be willing to listen. So where I want to start with a quote that I shared, and it's from a woman. She's a Nigerian author. Her name is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and she, a number of years ago, did a TED Talk that got a lot of attention, and it was called The Danger of a Single Story. And what she was addressing in that TED Talk was perceptions and misperceptions that people had of the continent of Africa and also the country of Nigeria. And so she was talking about this single story that would be told that was about negativity, about darkness, about violence and people starving, that there was this misperception of Africa that was keeps being told over and over again. And so the quote that I shared with the group, and I'll share it with everyone now, is this is a quote from her TED Talk. So that is how to create a single story. Show a people as one thing, as only one thing, over and over again, and that is what they become. But to insist on only these negative stories is to flatten my experience and to overlook the many other stories that formed me. The single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. And so I think where I want to kind of start is the place that ultimately we're trying to move away from. But I would ask each of you, just if you could share a little bit about from your own community, what is the single story that has been told about your community, which I'm assuming is not always a positive story. What is the single story? And when you thought about getting started on trying to shift that story, what are 1 or 2 things you did to get started?
What's the mic? I'll talk first. Well, here, for my generation, I'm 32, so before I got into high school, the main story that made national news here in Decatur was about a fight that happened during a football game. It made CNN. It was a national story. So for the longest, up until recently, you Google Decatur, Illinois, that will be the story that will still pop up. So we had, especially for my generation, of young people being violent. They don't know how to behave. The misfits, but we've made a conscious effort together as a community to promote all the great things that we have here in Decatur, and for that not to be the lead story. So if you Google Decatur, Illinois, for that not to be our representation, because it is just an incomplete story. Fights happen everywhere, but for that to be our number one story, because it made national news. So for the longest, for decades, that was the only story, but it was incomplete. So we've made an effort to highlight the arts that we have here, all of our beautiful community partnerships, all the resources we have here, and together to promote that. And social media has been a platform for us to do that. So it's not just a news station. Now you have individuals like myself and people in the community who promote our city,
And Terrence, I want to get into and giving you all the opportunity to talk about some of the positive things that are happening, but I'm just wondering in terms of getting started, if you can recall, how did you get started? Were there one or two things that felt important to begin to turn that around?
Well, I went to a discussion, Jerry was there, that like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and it was a discussion about how we're going to change our image, how we're going to beautify Decatur, how we're going to come together and highlight everything that we have to offer. So we collectively as a community, so we have people that were on boards and councils and community leaders, we all came together and made a conscious effort to promote our city in a better light. So we did that together. And that was like 4 or 5 years ago. So we've taken the initiative to highlight the arts that we have. We have a lot of wonderful things and wonderful people here. So that's what we consciously did, because the only thing that would come up was something that was in our past. We had been past that. But any time you would mention Decatur, they will always see it as a violent place, that didn't have many resources or anything to offer, which wasn't true.
And began with a discussion with people coming to just even ask the question, how do we change our image?
Can I interject something real quick about
Yeah,
that?
of course.
There was a group about that time, I think it might have been what you're talking about, Tad, called Grow Decatur.
That's it.
Decatur's had a number of sort of stop and start self-improvement ideas over the last couple of decades. In this group, one of the primary goals that was identified early was to create a position called the Community Marketing Manager, to tell Decatur's story, or at least help guide the telling of Decatur's story, to get as many people on board to tell their stories, and then share some common themes so that positivity was radiating in a variety of different ways. And so that was, I think, a major accomplishment of that particular movement, was to create that position.
Yeah, that's exactly what was Grow Decatur. I couldn't think about it. So thank you, Jerry.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Can I just add?
Yeah, please.
I'm Pat McCain, born and raised here. I agree with Tate on that, the issue of the school violence that was happening. But unfortunately, Decatur has had some really tough situations. Of course, we had the ADM situation with executives going to jail. We've had major union strikes and company lockouts. We've had a variety of things over the years, unfortunately. We're a resilient community, we come back, but that perception is out there on some of that. But I just wanted to add, that was one issue, but we've had several here in the last 20 years that has kind of hurt us, but at the same time, we've fought back and tried to get out the positive story. But unfortunately, in any community, people remember the bad stuff, and of course, the media can play a bad part in making headlines out of the stuff, and that's what people look at, is the headlines. That's what sells newspapers or the media, so.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. Wonderful. So let's continue on with this. The question of what's the single story in your own community, and how did you get started addressing it? Everybody's so nice. Good job.
I can go. So I think the single story, if you will, in Rockford is not dissimilar from the single, maybe negative story in a lot of communities like Rockford. So Rockford is in northern Illinois. We're outside of the shadow of Chicago. Manufacturing town powered by innovation for decades and decades. Began to see decline, in the 70s, early 70s, again, big time in the 80s. And so those ebbs and flows of the economy sometimes really ebbed, especially, in the 70s and 80s, and really started changing the psyche of our community. We became a community that was versus a community that was going to be something better, where people were looking backwards versus looking forward. I hadn't thought about it in quite a few years, and maybe that's good or maybe it's bad, but in the mid-90s, when I graduated from high school, Rockford Public Schools were found guilty of systemic segregation, discrimination in our public schools, to the point that the federal judge said that Rockford raised discrimination to an art form. So that was certainly the reality of that, and then how that changed through court-ordered reforms and such in the schools. That became local, especially locally, I think, a single story that really marred the community and had to be righted. And I think we've moved in a really good direction since then, economically, socially, in the education community. But one thing that strikes me as I'm hearing part of this discussion is, I didn't know much of that at all. I think locally, our bad news resonates more than it does externally. So I remember when I was earlier in my position, we did some reputation market research of Rockford. What do people objectively know about Rockford in markets around us, in the Chicago markets? I know we did work in the Quad Cities, north of us in Wisconsin. And it wasn't so much that they had a negative perception, they didn't have any perception. So that was a good place to start from. Like, how do we start telling a different story? I think we stopped as an organization, and maybe other communities stopped, trying to fix something that nobody else knew about from a reputation standpoint. We didn't have to overcome all the obstacles that we thought we did, because they were more internal than external. So you have to deal with that internally, but we were dealing with a different set of reputational realities externally in those days.
Could you say a little bit about the Mission Post?
Sure. So probably 5 years ago now, 4 years ago, Forbes magazine came out with, we've been on a lot of bad lists, and to the point that we discredit them, or we say it doesn't matter, but there was one that really mattered or really resonated in our community. So Forbes came out with the most miserable cities ranking, and we were the third most miserable city in the country. Yeah, so that was real fun. And, so it's like, well, Chicago's on the list too, and Minneapolis, and these other cities that I think are cool. And so we actually thought about creating a coalition of communities that were on the list, but that didn't work out. What we ended up doing within about 2 weeks was we launched a campaign that was called Misery Loves Company. And it was social, so it was just a couple years ago, so it was on Facebook and Twitter, and we had video-based and some advertising. And we really said, we're not, and I think that maybe was a key turning point. We really said that we're not going to let somebody else define us. And that word, was like, we felt as our team felt, that we had to take the sting out of the word and say, you might think we're miserable, and you might, we get docked for like bad weather in the Midwest in winter. Okay, yeah, we're not going to be sunny on the beach. And some things that we really had to change. But we said, we looked at our gardens and our golf courses and our museums and our restaurants, and basically said if misery looks so bad or tasted so bad or this isn't misery. Misery loves company, and you might as well be in good company. And I think it got a lot of play and a lot of buzz. It also got a little bit of backlash. I've never had a change.org petition against one of my marketing campaigns, and there was that, and I felt really good about it. But that was a time where I think we decided that we weren't going to let other people's negative media listicle define us or inform who we felt we were. So you can Google "Misery Loves Company" in Rockford, and our video will come up. It's still ranks pretty high. Google. Okay. Right. Well, you what ranks? It's important. You got
Marshall, might you do that?
Well, certainly. Kewanee, Henry County. We have several stories there. We have the biggest story that made the news was some years back when one of our mayors decided he wanted to punch out Santa Claus. And of course, there was I'm not sure what it was all about, but the mayor did actually hit a guy with a Santa Claus suit on, and it made the national. See, now you know Rockford, it made everywhere. It was on the night, the talk shows at night, but that was sort of humorous. One of the things, as far as Kewanee in Henry County being a rural area, and I think a lot of it is self-perception. We have had some people speak in terms of Kewanee in itself as being lower income, although there are many people there that are quite wealthy. But for the most part, they think of it as a lower income people. The schools, we have two school districts there. That caught me by surprise when I moved in. It's a town of 13,000 people with two school districts. And there's a Division Street. And you don't go past Division Street. And the streets on the south side, which is the Weathersfield area, they don't match up with the streets on the north side, which is the Kewanee area. And that's years back when the town was founded. Weathersfield was found first. Years later, they brought the railroad in, and Kewanee became the hub. And Northsiders and Southsiders, the adults, haven't liked each other since. Kids get along fine. But a couple of years back, we had a youth facility there, which was closed down. It was the newest one in the state of Illinois. It was paid for. And we had plenty of people to work there. But they decided they would rather close that one down and rent another place around the Chicago area. I couldn't quite figure that out. But we did end up repurposing that. We went down to Springfield, we talked with the governor and with various representatives. And now we have a life skills reentry center for adults. And these gentlemen, they're learning various skills, welding, they're learning just how to get back out into the world. Some of these guys, they've been in jail for 20, 30 years. The world has changed. It's totally changed. And we have volunteers that go in and talk with them and teach them various skills. After the first year they had been there, they had a what was called a day with Dad. The warden there got volunteers from the community. The gentlemen, the men that were inside, they made various toys, games for the kids to play. And the children came in and they played the entire day. They had hot dogs and hamburgers, and it was a beautiful thing. We've had several people who have been released. The recidivism is very low there. Another thing we've had, there is a drug problem throughout the state, but we've had businesses that would not come in because of the number of people who could not pass the drug test. That's something that we're working on. School dropouts, we've started various tutoring programs. I was involved with a program called ABCD some years ago where we just tutored folks, the little guys that came in, teachers, being there to help them with their homework, There's a junior achievement programs that are going on, starting in kindergarten, all the way up through high school, teaching kids about the not only jobs, but starting businesses themselves, things dealing with civic responsibilities, voting, and things of that sort. And we're doing what we can to change things. Now, you may notice I'm wearing teal and purple today. I'm a president of it's a Freedom House. It's located in Princeton, Illinois, which is in Bureau County, but it covers 5 counties. It's a sexual violence and domestic violence shelter. And this month is Sexual Violence Awareness Month, so that's why the tie. But we have been involving the police, and many times the police used to say to women who had been abused, well, what did you do to make them angry? That has happened. I spoke with one lady who had been hit in the head with a bottle, and they called the police, and the officer that came by said, my wife is like that too. And we're doing everything we can to change minds and change hearts. And I've been on a radio station in Kewanee and mentioned this. That is not something that makes you a man just in order, if you strike a woman. That's not acceptable. And we have to get it throughout the entire community that is not acceptable. Other than that, we are changing our business practices. There was a time when if you didn't, businesses we weren't open to them. There was a clique of businessmen who kept everyone out. We managed to, some of them died off, and we managed to change our thinking on things. We need business.
Yeah.
And so we're doing what we can in order to get, to maintain what we have and to bring in anything else that we can. As a matter of fact, we're in the process of hiring an economic development director for the county, and we have all the municipalities throughout the county are united in this, and that's something that has not happened in a long time. Cities tend to think of their silos. I'm taking care of mine, but we've got the mindset, if something happens in, say, Geneseo or Orion or one of the other communities in Henry County, that's good for all of Henry County. Yeah. So we're trying to work together to do the best we can, although as Springfield helps us out every chance they get.
Yeah. Well, I want to get Sarah in here next, but I wanted to just highlight the thing I heard from many of you, and Marshall, you talked a lot about this, was that when you're talking about amplifying efforts inside your cities and towns, you have both the audience, the external audience, but the internal audience too, of how is it affecting the self-image of people in the community, and how is it affecting relations between people within the community too. So I know you talked a lot about that with me, about the misperceptions around inmates, misperceptions around survivors of domestic abuse, and how the media coverage can actually help build bonds between people as well. So thank you for that. And Sarah, let me get you in. Same question about single story and how you got started. Turn it over.
I would say predominantly our single story is that Alton is washed up. Similar to what you were saying, our best years were behind us. You know, we were booming with industry at one time. At one time, Alton had the most millionaires per capita than any city in the entire United States. And everybody likes to talk about that, talk about the good old days. And, you know, we had the steel mill and the glassworks and the boxboard factory and, you know, all these booming industries. And one by one, they all fell away. And it really, we are just struggling with how to reinvent ourselves. Added to that problem, Alton is very divided. You talked about silos from town to town. Within Alton, it wasn't planned, you know, with an urban design in mind. It grew with annexation. So we annexed in smaller communities at our peripheral, and then so that leads to that we have many central business districts. We literally have downtown Alton, Upper Alton, and North Alton, each with its own culture, its own organizations, its own everything. So I would say, you know, when I first signed on as the director of Main Street, that was 12 years ago, my very first step was to try to build bridges, to try to get all of us in the same room, try to, you know, communicate with one another. And I will not lie, the first time I walked into the Upper Alton Association meeting, everybody kind of side-eyed me and like, what are you doing here? You're the downtown person, in a town of 28,000 people, that is so ridiculous that it was so divided, but it absolutely was. And it's only with, over a decade of, sharing and coming back to the table and, letting people know that I was sincere in my efforts to work together and that, really that's the only way that Alton is going to be able to decide what its future is. Up until very recently, Alton was always just known as the town with so much potential that was going nowhere. We had no idea what we wanted to be. We didn't have an identity. We didn't have, a coalition of everybody making these decisions as one community. Everybody was just doing what they wanted in their own little worlds, and we were not together as a community. So thankfully we've made great strides, but that was definitely the first step that I tried to take, is to get everybody working with one another.
So let me, so same question, but I know you're bringing a different angle, Molly, since you're a reporter and a journalist, and I wanted to maybe ask you to talk a little bit about how you're navigating, as a journalist, this idea of a single story and how that shows up in your own work.
Yeah, sure. Great question. I guess I'm the journalist on the panel, so if you want to throw carrots at me, right? Tomatoes. Yeah, I'm like listening. I'm like, okay, I haven't read any of those stories. I've looked a lot of places in the state, read a lot of stories. I haven't read any of the ones that everyone was really griping about, but I've read plenty that people gripe about. Don't worry. It's tough as a reporter, and especially if you work for a really small newspaper like the Southern Illinoisan in Carbondale. Our sister paper in Decatur, very much in a similar boat. I think they may have just a couple more reporters, and they're twice as large as Carbondale. We cover with 4 reporters about 15 counties in southernmost Illinois. It's tough, to get to everything. And so a lot of times people say, why aren't you doing every positive story in our community? And so that, again, that gets into that balance issue being tough, that you want to tell the stories you have to tell, the fires that have to be put out, sometimes literally, running to house fires and that sort of thing, and sometimes just the big community stories that are going on, and then try to make sure you're getting back to balance that out, which I think is critically important. But I'm also realistic that we can only do so much and be so many places, and so just tough decisions had to be made. I think there's a lot of truth that a lot of times people, just like you can tell a single negative story about a community, you can tell a single negative story about the media and how we're perpetuating negative stereotypes. I think there's some truth to that. I also think, I hear this a lot in our own communities, and I think some of it is what resonates. We were talking about that, what resonates internally with folks, because often we will have written 10 super positive stories, but that is not what people remember. I can think of one story I wrote, and the timing was really terrible. I'll just be blunt about it. It was about, we've had a sort of rash of shootings in Carbondale a couple years ago, and no different than it was going on in any other community. Young people using guns to settle basic beefs with each other, where they used to just punch each other in the nose. Now they're shooting each other and their kids, and we had a musician got caught in the crossfire. We had just the situation unfold. Most of it had to do with some people wrong place, wrong time, and some drug trafficking and stuff like that. And so we wrote about that. We published that story. It happened to be like, as these events were happening, there had been just like one after another every weekend. But we published the story on opening weekend of SIU Carbondale, and so we got a rash of negative comments. I mean, you want to talk about just people flooding the paper with, this is why SIU is dying, this negative stories. And I had 2 thoughts on that. One was, we should not have run it that weekend. I really don't think that was the appropriate weekend. We could have run it the following weekend or the weekend before. It wasn't like intentionally timed to be at the opening weekend of SIU, but it was timely. Like, these things were happening as we were reporting on it. It was a real lesson for me. On the other hand, I heard people talking about the story and saying, well, this is this reality that the newspaper is painting, and this is why everyone's fleeing to SEMO. But I got on and I looked at like Cape Girardeau's newspaper, and Cape Girardeau, slightly larger than Carbondale, but similar economics, similar college town, and there's all kinds of stories about shootings in Cape Girardeau. And so I don't know that, we were writing any more about shootings and they were writing about shootings. And so what I began to believe is that these are the headlines that people are sharing. And there's nothing wrong with the headlines. I mean, 2 people shot in downtown Carbondale. I don't know how else to write that, or how more straightforward you can be. The Cape paper, same thing, family shot in their home, whatever. These are the things that people share on Facebook. These are the things that generate traffic. so much of that media algorithms, Facebook algorithms are totally out of our control. So, you know, there's all of these feelings I have and thoughts that, yes, I do believe the media is part of this. I also sometimes think there's a short-sighted view of what the media is doing or how much people actually put stock in these headlines that are things that we should cover. I mean, this is news, right? Like, I mean, so if somebody punches Santa Claus, like an elected official, like that is news, you know? But that doesn't define an entire community, and I think if you let it, then that's sort of on you, and I think there's so many other things going on that we're just looking for things to blame, and sometimes media headlines can be an easy target, in my opinion. I mean, I've driven, last year I got to work with ProPublica, which is a really cool experience, and I had the entire year to do investigative journalism on public housing. So I drove from basically Hero all the way up to Hartford, Connecticut, and stopped in a lot of places along the Ohio River Valley, in Indiana and Ohio, Pennsylvania. And every conversation in every community sounds just like the ones we're having here. There's no different. All these, you know, every town is struggling to reinvent itself. Every town is losing industry. Every town feels segregated. Every town feels like there's crime problems, drug problems, and that everything is working against them. So to me, it's just like sometimes we're looking for something to blame when a lot of these economic forces are, you know, just totally, the wind's blowing against us and people are doing really cool things to move forward. And as journalists, it's totally our obligation to cover those things too. But also not to sugarcoat what is happening and to put it in context, which to me means like not a listicle about like 10 most dangerous cities in Illinois, because there's no context there. But the Belleville News Democrat did a story recently, a series of stories on gun violence in East St. Louis and how it is devastating families there, which is something when I reported in East St. Louis, I heard time and time again. And that made some in the community very, very upset, and I understand why. But I will say that this was a story told with nuance and layered nuance about how racism and, you know, just the forgotten, neglected East St. Louis had resulted in this societal collapse. And so there's a difference between just naming a city on a list and putting into deep context. You know, and then I would, not speaking for the Belleville News Democrat, but and they do this, they're responsible for making sure they're telling positive stories about East St. Louis also, of course. But that's just an example on my mind lately that I know those things hit hard in communities and they're uncomfortable and they're tough and the media it's fair to criticize the media. But I also think that if we act like these things are happening, that we don't discuss them, that we bury them, and we're not willing to talk about, you know, who's responsible and whose reality are we ignoring.
So I want to, do you want to jump in on that one?
I spent a number of years skating around the country, and so people made it their business to let me know about the next town. And the next towns were always the bad story. Yeah. And I had lost 2 pocket knives over a decade of skating from town to town, and always just leaving my backpack out and just, so it wasn't really all that dangerous, but I was always warned. Yeah, next time, they're just terrible. That's true.
Well, before we get into this, I want you to all have a chance to share some of the positive stories that maybe aren't getting lifted up. Why don't we just go to that, and then I want to come back to this question of balance and how you address issues at the same time that you're lifting up the positive things that are happening. But I want to just start with this question of like, what are some stories that are not being told or haven't been told as much that are maybe you're trying to get out there now or that you're trying to lift up about your community? And I'd love to just hear some like concrete stories that now that we actually have some media in the room, what would you like people to know and hear about the community that you're from?
I got the
You got it there.
And I think Jerry could speak a lot more of the initiative with art downtown and around our city. We got a lot, like in the school district, you know, we got a lot of what I like to call the ambassadors of our community who self-promote. Like I said, we use social media as a platform to highlight everything that we're doing positive.
And both websites that you created and also like Facebook, Twitter,
Panelists, Decatur, all of those initiatives. Like we made a conscious effort after Grow Decatur to put out the positive, to promote it through the media, with me being on radio, the newspaper, television stations, we made a conscious effort to just promote everything that we're doing positive, with the families, with the friends, with the community together. I've seen a bunch of different stories. I don't know, Jerry, with the art, are we still doing?
Yeah, we got Jerry Johnson with the Decatur Area Arts Council.
Yeah.
And, we've got lots of great stuff going on. I mean, just this space, the Scoville Zoo, the Children's Museum, and the sculpture park right over here is only 3 years old. Our organization started a mural project, and we had 7 or 8 murals painted around town, and we got 2 more this year. Our goal is 2 every year until we run out of buildings and money and artists. So there are a lot of those things. I was going to mention, Tad, in terms of an untold story. It just feels to me like the work that's being done to improve Decatur schools is maybe not getting the kind of credit that it deserves, because there is a perception that we don't have a good school system. Our District 61 is not quality, and there's a lot of work being done around that. A lot of improvements have been made, so I think that may be a big sort of untold story here in Decatur, because there are a lot of positive things going on that are told and told and told. I mean, we're working really hard to get those positive stories out. I mean, across the lake in Nelson Park, they're finishing an amphitheater that's going to open in a couple of weeks, and they're doing a water park in that same park, and there are other things going on. 5 years ago, they redid the entire downtown area, so there's a lot of positive things happening, but I just feel like maybe the Decatur schools is one that's overlooked, and you're very involved with that.
How can now Decatur, is that out of room?
That's through the radio station.
They do a lot of good.
It's their online presence.
Yeah, it's our online presence, so it's with our, now Decatur, we take it upon ourselves to not just do the on-air radio, but we know that people are online, social media, on their phones all the time. So we have an app, now Decatur app, and we highlight everything that's going on here. We piggyback off of the news and the newspaper to promote everything that we cover on the radio. Now we just put it in a digital form. So we have photographers, we have reporters, and so everything that we promote on the radio is what we promote on our website. And you can get more content on nowdecatur.com. And with me being in school, go ahead.
No, so it just sounds, it's fascinating because it sounds like these very important and happening initiatives, but also that you built an infrastructure
Yes.
around social media to amplify
Most
this
definitely.
stuff and promote.
Because you
it on
have
a
to be
regular
where the
basis.
people are, you know.
And that community marketing manager and the limitlessdecatur.com effort, just like Now Decatur is, that's a commercial version, but Limitless Decatur is based out of the Economic Development Corporation, and that's where the community marketing manager works. And so they're trying to help lead the messaging about
Yes.
it.
Gotcha. Let me get, Ellie, did you want to jump in and?
Yeah, just
Pat?
as an outsider's perspective, I get to know some of the people in the work here in Decatur. One of the things that I've been super impressed with, and I know that Tad and I have already talked about this, is just the level of civic participation and community engagement. That is, there's a lot of different ways for people to be involved, and there's a lot of people who are involved in about 6 or 7 or 8 different groups around here, you know, so I think that's also an untold story. So like the infrastructure is there's all these great programs going on, but there's also people who are doing the things and doing lots of different things, and I think that that's really noticeable and heartening for me.
I was going to say, you know, talking about Facebook and social media. I think social media can be good, but it's also the worst thing for communities, because the people within use Facebook. I mean, people put things on Facebook you wouldn't tell your priest, and that stuff gets out. But again, it can be a plus, but it can be a major minus for a community, because people that, sometimes your worst enemies are within your own community. Okay, you need people that come from the outside and move in. They're more positive because they see the positive things. Where they usually don't go on Facebook, it's always the negative people and that. So social media can, like I said, can be a blessing, but a lot of times it can be a big negative for a community.
Thank you. John,
I just want to So I started off by saying I wasn't aware of some of the things that here locally were maybe part of the negative narrative at some point. But I am aware of the murals and the public art. I'm aware of Limitless Decatur. I've shared that stuff locally. And I don't know how, I have a cousin who lives here, works for the Park District, and I know my counterpart, Terry, who runs the Visitors Bureau here. Yes. Those are the only two social media connections I have here. But through the algorithms of Facebook and the web, those things got into my feed. I decided to like, and I started following. And so when I drove down today, I intentionally made sure I had an extra hour before I had to be here so I could drive around and see some of the things. And so, I do think that those social outlets, social media, can amplify your positive message in a way that your local media might not be able to, or your economic development corporation might not be able to through their traditional efforts. Now that it sounds like you have a pretty innovative approach to that. So I just want to encourage you with that.
Thank you.
And what about positive unfold?
I think there's a lot of positive untold stories that we all have, and I had, as the head of the Visitors Bureau, had to get out of my way of thinking that the only stories that we would tell would be ones that were tourism related or that would bring a visitor to town. So we, about 2 years ago, started a regional and national public relations earned media program where we're working with a firm. Sometimes you got to spend money to make money or to change the narrative. And we decided that we would have a couple different story platforms or pillars. So we are pitching stories about the innovation that's coming out of our aerospace cluster. The way that we're changing the trajectory of our public schools or public housing. Because all of those stories shine a really bright light back on our community and can change the narrative about our city as a place to visit or live. If some of the reasons that somebody might not want to come to Rockford is because they've heard something negative about crime, then we have to tell the story. I can't just say, hey, here's my museums and my golf courses. We might need to help highlight what our police department is doing with community policing to also change the narrative. So I think, we all have probably those great stories in infrastructure development or education. Rockford has one of the largest aerospace clusters in the country. So the old manufacturing made way for aerospace innovation, and that's one of our big positive stories right now. So we're going to take the time, the effort, the resources to tell those stories, along with our Economic Development Council or our city. And I think that helps us change our own narrative. And we amplify it on Facebook.
Let's see. Well, I'm seeing a double shift going on in Alton. I mean, honestly, when I went to college, it was still just pre-social media. So when I got my public relations degree, the training was all about crafting the perfect press release, because there's only so many square inches in the newspaper, and they will only pick the very best things, the best written things. That's right. And now with everything going online, there's limitless space. So honestly, our local media has been wonderful. With every positive human interest story and good thing going on story that we feed them, they print it almost immediately and almost word for word, and then sometimes even follow up and do investigative further interviewing and everything. So I think really that has been a major help in helping to get the word out about all the things that are going on, is just having that many more outlets through the media to be able to counterbalance a little bit. I mean, I have lots of friends who are reporters, and I don't envy their job at all. When bad things happen, it's news and it needs to be reported on, and unfortunately, bad things happen all the time. But it takes people like us in the room, I think, to give them content, to give them, help. They have a hard job as it is in covering the things that need to be covered. We need to do our part to help root out these wonderful things that are going on, the unsung heroes and the people that need more light shown on them, and introduce them to reporters and help them. Not everyone's a writer. Write something on their behalf and send it and submit it to people to help more people who are doing great things get into the media.
Can we just take up this question about relationships in the media? And because you talked about this on the phone, Molly, about forming a relationship with people in Cara, for instance. But do you want to talk a little bit about how does that affect media coverage?
How does relationships? Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just to piggyback on what you said, our paper also welcomes community input. We label those things appropriately, like if it's press release or op-ed, or we even now are running the SIUC Carbondale News Service. They write their own media, which are mostly just like really positive stories about things going on campus. Frankly, like it's the entire former staff of the Southern that's there anyway. So like everyone that used to be a reporter like ditched the newspaper business and like clubbed onto their SIU job. So like we're real familiar with these writers, but I mean we count on that to fill our paper, and I think it's helpful because it allows us to free up some time to do a little bit more in-depth stuff and still allows those super positive, worthy stories to get told. Again, I think it is often an issue of time. As far as relationships, I mean, I think that's key. We were talking on the phone that I did a lot of reporting in Cairo over the last, Cairo, Illinois, everyone knows where that is, I'm hoping, at the very bottom of the state, at the confluence of the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, and that's how I got started on a series last year investigating public housing for ProPublica. And I grew up near Cairo, so I'm not unfamiliar with Cairo, but I grew up in Simpson, probably an hour away, but in the bottom 7 counties. So we think of us as the most southern Illinois area, south of Carbondale, where people think the state drops off. Many people seem to think that. But I had come back home, it was like 2014. I want to say I got some messages about what was happening with the Cairo public housing in 2015. And it's been a long time since I visited Cairo. And this story that unfolded was a really difficult story about Cairo, right? Cairo is an almost entirely African-American community that was the site of some really vicious racism and civil rights battles through the 70s, was known for, talk about the narrative that gets told, was known for the, Illinois State Guard getting sent down there during the era of the 70s. And then it seemed like there was just not a lot written about Cairo for 30 years or so. Our newspaper stopped delivering papers at some point south of Anna. We don't cover city council meetings, frankly, in anywhere but Carbondale and Marion. So there's no routine coverage. So that cuts both ways. I mean, it's one thing to say like you don't feel like you're getting enough positive news, but the other piece is that the lack of journalists means that you're just not getting enough watchdog news, which, to me is probably the more critical aspect of things. And so there's just been a lot going on in Cairo. Atrocious housing conditions and an executive director who's now been having to pay $500,000 back to the federal government for his actions down there and helping run the housing into the ground while HUD basically looked the other way. And so, that was like I said, the fire burning, right? So this is the thing I'm going down there for, but they hadn't had coverage in a really long time from our paper. And so as we were covering that story, I definitely had folks, I'm just kind of getting to know the community because I just moved back home. And I had a lot of folks just sort of reach out and say like, hey, we really, really appreciate what you're doing. And people didn't not want that story told, especially people who were living in these housing conditions, but they also just, that the residents and also community leaders wanted to make sure we were telling positive stories as well. And I think that's what we talked about. And I did, even though it was hard, make the time to go down and write about their life. They had this super cool violin program. That they're teaching violin to the kids in the schools. There's not hardly, I don't know any other school in Southern Illinois in our region doing that. And so we would find these things to write about. And there's tons of stuff to write about there that's positive. But again, that goes back to that. How do you balance like this really serious thing that's happening, that really did warrant a lot of time being spent on it, but making sure you got to know the community and some of the things that they had going on that were really positive as well. So I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Well, maybe it's just a good time to take up this question, which is, and any of you who are interested in jumping in, please do, but this question of, we've been talking a lot about not telling a single story that might be a negative story, and how do you tell sort of these positive stories and get them out here. But then to Molly's point, you also want to tell the important stories about what's happening to people's lives, hopefully so that some of those issues get addressed, that might be connected up nationally and they're not just local stories. And I'm just wondering about that, how you're balancing that, or in the roles that you're in, what role you have in maybe trying to balance that and think about that.
So one thing that's really important to us as storytellers, as marketers on behalf of our region, is that we don't shy away from the tough stuff. That, and that kind of goes back to Misery Loves Company. We had fun with that and kind of try to change the narrative and own the word. But we also were very clear that there are some really tough challenges that we have to address. I mean, as a community, you know, some of the things that are written are true about crime, public safety, educational attainment levels. There's also great things that are true about innovation and entrepreneurship and a caring community. But we don't shy away from the tough stuff. So we had an example. There's one of our very best burger joints in Rockford is owned, and the chef owner is a guy named James Purefoy. So James opened a restaurant called 15th and Chris at the corner of 15th and Christina in a section of town that you might not otherwise want to go to. You know, it's right across the street from one of our public housing units in sort of industrial part of town. Not always the cover of our visitor's guide, I can put it that way. But it's one of the best restaurants. And he serves a mean burger. But what people don't like me telling the story about all the time, I've had a few people say, are you sure that's the story you want to tell? James spent a decade in one of Illinois' state penitentiaries. He taught himself how to cook in the state penitentiary. And he tells that story about how he, when he was incarcerated, decided to turn his life around, that he was going to get out and he was going to make a difference in his community, in his neighborhood. So he opened this restaurant at what was the neighborhood ice cream stand and had been really boarded up for 25 plus years. From the time he was a very young kid until probably 5 years ago, 4 years ago when he opened it up. And I love telling that story, and people said, John, I don't think you should tell it. And no, if we can't tell a story about transformation and renewal and how somebody took a negative and turned it into a positive, then we shouldn't be telling stories at all. But isn't that the story we want to tell about our community? That people can, make a difference in their neighborhood. They can turn around their life. They can influence others. They can do it through food by bringing the community together. And I think that's how we can be true to both sides. We can talk about the challenges and the opportunities, or we can talk about the renewal as well as the decline without having to shy away from it.
Marshall, want to respond to that question?
Well, I like that story about James.
You should all come.
His burgers are amazing. So often we look at people, we don't know what they've gone through in their lives. We don't know why they have done what they've done. But there's people can and do change. It's I think of myself. I'm a young fellow living on the south side of Chicago and west side of Chicago. I was just fortunate that I did not get caught doing some of the things that everyone else in the neighborhood was doing. And we have the same thing in all of our communities. There are people, wealthy people well thought of that do all sorts of things. And sometimes we look at people that did get caught and we look down our nose at them. But we shouldn't. We shouldn't. Especially when they make the effort to make a change. And that's something that I really believe in. It's taking responsibility for what you've done. So yes, I did this. So often when we do things, we want to blame everyone else. We want to blame the society. There is racism in America, okay? But so what? We need to do what we want to do. There was a friend of mine. He passed away a few years ago. Colonel James Oliver Culver. He joined the National Guard in Kewanee. He's a black man. He worked in the kitchen. He decided he was going to become an officer. Everyone around him said, you'll never do that. He became an officer. He went to Vietnam. When he was over in Vietnam, he was in logistics, but he wanted to fly helicopters. He said, I'm going to fly helicopters. Everyone put him down. You can't do that. He flew helicopters. He did rise up to the rank of colonel. He would go back to D.C. once a year and put his time in there. Something else that this gentleman did, he had a younger brother. He made sure his younger brother went to college. He sent him to Bradley University, made sure he graduated. The younger brother also, he joined the Air Force. James was in the Army, John was in the Air Force. John became a colonel in the Air Force and commanded a base in Japan. He has a son, James Jr. He doesn't like to be called Junior now, but he rose to the rank of major. He has another son that didn't follow that same path, but he's still doing positive things. I can remember a story, and it hit me. James was having a hard time in the service. He was out in Virginia, and he was walking along the beach, and he was muttering to himself, and he just didn't know what to do. And he said, he saw a little jellyfish just washed up on the shore. And the thought came to him, am I a man or a jellyfish? He said, I'm a man. And that's the thing, we have to exert our manhood. We have to do the things, and there are some hard things that we must do, but do it. And don't whine about it. People will put things in your way, you expect that. But if you set your goal, you plan your work, you do it, you check it, you adjust, and you keep going. And that's what we have to do in our communities as well.
Right.
One quick thing kind of relates to that. And Tat, you mentioned the fight. How does Courtney speak to his experience?
Exactly, I was going to bring that up. Like with Courtney Carson, he was one of the students who was in the big fight that made national news. And now he's a reverend, he's a community leader, activist. He's doing so much positive things and contributing to the community as a whole. And that's something that's not touched upon, you know.
But he owns his past, and he talks about it, and how he moves forward from there.
And that's what you're supposed to do. Like the kids that I work with, young people want to know your stories because they already don't trust you as adults. So they want to know that you are flawed and that you came from where they came from, or you have your own story, and you should tell it. Don't be ashamed of how you got to where you are, because that's the way I connect with the students that I mentor. Let them know that I was a teen parent, you know, and my slips, my pitfalls and stuff like that. But that's how you connect with the generation who's going to excel in the community, and you pass the baton to, but you have to be transparent. Yeah. And that goes through all our communities, being transparent with the community, not sugarcoating the bad things, but also highlighting the good things, but letting it be known, this is what's happening, and this, how can we go about resolving the issues that we currently are facing. But you have to be transparent and tell your story. And Courtney's a great example of letting everyone know his story and how he became the man he is today.
Great, thank you. So did you have one you wanted to?
Sure, yeah. I actually have a kind of an interesting story and turn of events that kind of plays right into that line of conversation. So thankfully, in the past year, media has been a very positive influence on Alton. If you haven't caught wind, we were actually chosen to be the third season of a Hulu television reality show called The Small Business Revolution. It's put on by the Deluxe Corporation. It was really exciting because fundamentally it was all about, we had to vote ourselves in.
Talk about the process.
Sure, yeah. So we have a local brewery that opened up. It was actually a very similar story, born and raised in Alton, had moved away and came back home to lay down roots and start their business. And they had been a fan of the first 2 seasons of the show and heard a call for nominees for the next season and wrote an essay about how Alton was turning the corner and how we were on our way up again and how they should bring their team to come take a look. And they did. We showed them around about all the great things that were happening, and we made it to the top 5, and it was a big nationwide vote. So everyone, to the ends of the earth was all voting for Alton, and we won. And it was just an absolutely incredible experience. And honestly, it has made all the difference in the world. But to talk about, transparency and owning your past and having that be part of your story, the producers of the show were very honest with us that, they were taking a huge leap because the first 2 seasons had been very small towns. They pick 6 businesses and do a makeover for them, and each one gets their own episode. So before, it was all, a very small stretch right there on Main Street. It's called Small Business Revolution Main Street. So both towns had, very condensed areas right there, all the shops you could see each other. Alton was 3 times as large of a community that they had ever chosen. And we had a very different, business mix. So as they started to get the applications for the businesses who wanted to be featured in a program and get the makeover, they started reaching out to us about their idea of that maybe they take it off of Main Street. Maybe they choose businesses that were in all parts of town. And that's what ended up happening. They ended up choosing businesses in Upper Alton and North Alton, and they made a special point to include Black-owned businesses because we all, as they were interviewing all of us, we all kept talking about how Alton was just, on the brink of just really recognizing that we needed to all have a reckoning and own our past and walk into the future together. And it was just a really wonderful experience for all of those stories to get told. And one of the business owners, in the finale episode, he gives this speech. It's almost like he's at a pulpit. I mean, just talking about how we were all looking to the future together. I mean, Alton has a very, very rich history of being a part of the Underground Railroad and Elijah P. Lovejoy, abolitionist press, they threw his printing press in the river and he would not stop because he knew that was the message that needed to get out there. So we need to own that part of our past as well as the racial tension that happened and just realize that, we are all in this together. And, it was a conscious decision by everyone involved that we are going to be as inclusive as possible with this opportunity that we have. And it has been, has reaped a lot of benefits.
That's awesome.
So before I'm going to turn us in a minute to really just talk about this question of you've created a lot of civic momentum that's very positive and how to sustain that. But before I do that, I just want to push in on this question that you said about our past and kind of where we are now. And maybe, Molly, I want to ask this question of you first, but I guess this question of, it does seem in this country we love an individual story of transformation and change, and then clearly that can be a model for other people and important. But I'm wondering if you welcome or you feel like you need stories in your community that are telling systemic issues, that are addressing systemic issues. I'll just use the example of my hometown, which I think there's a lot of wonderful things that have happened there. The downtown's been rebuilt after 30 years of no town. There's a lot of industry that's come up that didn't exist there before. But it was also a sundown town, which those who may not know meant it was not safe to be a person of color, in particular a Black person in that city. During the civil rights movement in that whole time. Was not a safe place to be. I would say in many ways, it's probably still not the safest place to be. And so the question of what does racism that's a long-standing history look like in that town now? I would personally, as someone from that, welcome a story about that. I don't think it will ever happen because I don't think people would want the story told. But I'm guessing, I want to ask that question, are there stories that we don't necessarily want to be told, but need to be told? In order to solve some of these larger issues?
Well, absolutely, right? I'm the journalist, I guess, on the panel, and but we're all storytellers. But for me, journalism is mostly about telling the systemic issues and problems. And a lot of the reporting I've done, there's all kinds of different reporting, so I'm not trying to put it in a box. We have feature writers. We used to have tons of reporters, right? We have feature writers, community writers. We've lost a lot of that. I truly believe if you really wanted to tell the complete story, because I don't want to sit here and lie to you all and be like, yeah, we're telling the complete story. We're not. We're not telling it in Decatur. We're not telling it in Southern Illinois. We don't have the resources to do so. So we're just like, you and your county, I'm sure you're doing the best you can with the resources you have. You'd love to have more, right? And we're doing the same thing. I think that's, a good place to start. But so to me, with my limited time, I believe those things are critical because otherwise I don't know that our state leaders, especially in a long state like Illinois, know what's going on, and I don't know how else to tell those stories. And I think part of misperceptions has to do with not telling those stories. So my whole life I was told that if I went to St. Louis, don't accidentally get off in East St. Louis. If you do, lock your doors, look straight ahead, don't make eye contact. Well, I spent a lot of time in East St. Louis and, have had very, very few problems. I did have one issue. I did have, the last time I was there at a public housing complex, someone stopped my car and tried to sell me heroin right on the open street. But to me, that is a systemic problem that is going on in this community. And I didn't think, oh, and I wasn't unsafe. I just was, why do you think I want heroin? I thought, this must be why people are coming here, particularly white people. I mean, there was an assumption made, right? Like why I was here. And so that just made me feel sad because this is a complex where a lot of kids live, but I've never had any issues of safety. And so it's tough because I think there are these stories that are told about East St. Louis and Carroll in particular to economically troubled African American communities, and they have over time, a lot of my generation don't know the stories of what has happened in these communities, about white flight, about redlining, about the reasons why the white middle class left town and left the most disadvantaged. And so I write a lot of stories about disadvantaged communities. First of all, like anyone who lives in Carroll or St. Louis in some ways is living in a disadvantaged community that has been neglected, that has environmental injustices, air quality where the companies left behind, problems where the federal government didn't enforce fair housing, all of these problems, right? But within a disadvantaged community, there are disadvantaged people within that community. And that gets really tough because then you're talking about people at one level of the community are trying to build it and move it forward and are trying to fight the negative perceptions. On the other hand, if you totally ignore the really serious stuff going on for families in the homes, again, I mean, this just happened to me, one time I get sold, if someone tries to sell me drugs openly in the street on a Sunday afternoon, when I see a lot of families coming home from church, I can tell they're in their church clothes, it's like 1 o'clock on Sunday. And so this is a reality that people live in. So I don't have any good answers other than to say, like, it's super tough, I think. And I think if we ignore what is happening in these racial patterns about why people live where they live, and it's not just East St. Louis and Carroll, so every community, like in Carbondale, we have the east side of Carbondale has been historically neglected. And I think part of the danger of not telling those stories is a lot of folks, frankly, white folks of privilege will say, blame them, or say, well, this is just an East St. Louis problem, rather than, again, putting it in context, like, why are we having this societal collapse that is existing in these communities? And I think that if we don't tell those stories, then you have the misperceptions, again, that it's like something inherently flawed about the people running these communities. Because even management and mismanagement is a resource issue. Even crime and corruption and lack of oversight, which people will say, well, they're just so corrupt. Well, even that is a resource issue. Like, why isn't someone, manning the store here? Why don't you have the same sort of, people aren't inherently more flawed in these communities than anywhere else. It's just, again, all of these things that are playing out resource issues. And so, that's my long way of trying to answer that question.
No, it's great. And what do any of the panelists want to respond to that? Yeah.
I've also found that to be the case when friends of mine would come down from Chicago when I lived in Normal for a while. As a matter of fact, my wife, my late wife, she's from Alton, and she didn't want to move to Chicago, and I didn't want to move to Alton, so we stayed in Normal. But I remember the first house that apartment we wanted to rent. I called the owner up, made the appointment. The apartment was there. Everything's fine, sure. Come on by. My wife and I, we pulled up. We got out of the car. I saw a lady pull the curtain back, shut it, gone. I called back later. Oh, my husband, he already rented that apartment. It's we tend to be more comfortable with people who are like us. We tend, and you can call it racism, you can call it ignorance. For one, we do see the negative images out there, and we have a tendency to believe that everyone is the same way. That picture that we see all the time, that's the way everyone is. My sister, she came down to Kewanee for both of my sons' weddings, and one of them, the reception was out at a little country club out in the rural area, and she was really frightened with no lights. What is this? It's so dark out there. Anyone could be anywhere. There's that fear on both sides, and we have to get out of ourselves and make contact with other people. get to know other people. As we do that, we'll realize that yes, there are some jerks in the world, but everyone's not a jerk. And some people will simply, once they get to know you, they treat you just like anyone else. And it works both ways. So we have a lot of work. We have gotten to the point where we don't trust one another and we don't listen to one another. Listening helps a lot. Discussing things. Now, I've got friends that we have different viewpoints on. We have many different viewpoints, but yet we're still friends. One of my, a couple of folks on our county board, a couple of the Democrats there. They're some of my best friends there. I'm an anomaly. I'm a Republican in that community there. But yet, and there were some reasons for that. I've explained my reasons to various people, and but still, we have to live, and we work together. And this is my thing for our board. We're doing what we can, the best that we can for Henry County, and I charge the whole board to be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. We're not going to agree on everything. That's true. But at least listen to what the person is saying and try to feed back what I thought you said. And then as far as getting anger, tamp that down. And the more we talk about things, the more we can solve the problem there. But it's something that it's rampant, but we just have to keep working on it.
Yeah, and I think this question of who we're listening to, and one of the things I was sharing with you, John, is that one of the programs that we did was on police community relations in Rockford. And we did it at the African American Resource Center. It was a very diverse crowd, but one of the things that really came out was that we had a police chief on there who had been the first community policing officer. So originally when community policing started in Rockford, there was one person. And he's now in a small town and police chief somewhere else. But now that community policing has grown significantly, right? It's a big program. At the same time, the community there, which is a largely African American community, was saying, yes, but the training of police officers is so poor, and they don't have an understanding of the history of police and community relations, even though literally the kids in their neighborhood do have that understanding. So that if you only lifted up, look, we have this great community policing, you would totally miss this issue. And I think that's the question I'm asking. How do you lift this up and not, as you said, gloss over other issues? And so that's kind of what I'm highlighting.
And that's one thing that Jerry brought up about our school district. We get a lot of negative, like I'm not sending my kids to DPS 61, they're this, they're that, they're unruly, the teachers aren't there to educate. It's just a bunch of negative perception that goes on within the school district. One thing that has to be done, because we're visual creatures. That's what we are. That's why you have kids with emojis. They'll have a full conversation with emotions because we're visual. We understand it. So it's about representation, about the media. That's why I continue to bring up the social media aspect, because now we don't have to wait for somebody to tell our story or what's going on within our schools. I can take a picture, caption it, share it, have a video of me interacting with the kids and what the kids are doing is positive. A science experiment, something that's engineering what the students are getting trained on. They're going to trade schools, finding their job right after trade school. So that's how me personally combats that negative perception about our school district, is by the imagery, the representation, the media part is using that to counterbalance the people in the community that's negatively talking about our school district. So that's, for me, I think that's one of the things that Decatur's facing right now, is just the negative perception of DPS 61 and why you shouldn't send your kids there. we'll send them to Royal Forsyth or Mount Zion or something like that. But it's not true. Like with all districts, we have some work that needs to be done, and we don't sugarcoat it. But we're also a great school district.
Well, and it sounds like you're also highlighting the point that, yes, you're taking a picture and lifting this up, but you're also working in the schools.
Yes, and I'm also
Right.
working in schools because I always feel like, don't talk about it, be about it. So if you do see a problem, I see an opportunity for me to make an impact within the school district that produced me. I think I'm pretty awesome. So with that being said, I was like, I can give my input to the kids just by being, because once again, being a young African American male, I didn't grow up with any African American male or female within the school district. When I was growing up, it was always older white ladies. But to see a male in the schools with a lot of the black boys who don't have positive male figures, I'll let them know that you don't have to be in the streets just because you're in the streets, you know what I'm saying? You don't have to be a product of your environment or go down the path of repercussions of your actions. There's options. So I'm there to show them that there's options. You don't have to do what your dad or your uncles or your cousins do or have done. You can avoid that altogether. So it's about the imagery, by being present, I feel. So, and highlighting that, hey, I'm out here, you know. So imagery is very important.
I think that's really powerful because we all can, in the day and age we live, we can all amplify a message. I mean, we are all broadcasters. We are all, in a way, citizen journalists. You know, in an era where journalism has changed so much, especially, you know, folks who are in civic organizations or community organizations, I think we have a different role to play, or an added role to play, or that we can play, of amplifying positive messages into our community, into whoever our audiences are. Yours happen to be students, you know, through your day job, and I, you know, the single story, you know, doesn't have to be the only story, because we all have the opportunity to tell a different story, and I think, you know, from a, you know, I guess I am paid to be a professional marketer on behalf of our community, and I believe, you know, very firmly that in today's day and age, we do need to invest in marketing and promotion and storytelling, and to do so in professional ways, you know, maybe in ways that were different in the past. Maybe, you know, my line of work, destination marketing and, you know, tourism marketing, whether it's externally based or locally based to our citizens, you know, was much different 10, 15, 20 years ago, barely existed 30 years ago. You know, I just think there's a, you know, a totally new opportunity for all of us. I mean, who would have thought that, like, Alton would be, you know, telling some amazing stories through Hulu, you know, a Hulu TV series, and that is awesome, and, you know, lifting up. I mean, the whole landscape has changed, and we all get to be part of it, which is pretty cool.
Can I, so we're getting down, Marshall, do you have what you want to
Just one comment.
Yes, please.
On what Tana's doing. Being out there, being as a role model, an image for these young boys to look at. As you say, they do not have to follow after the dad that they don't know, or the dad that's out in the street, or the cousins, or in prison. I never knew my father. Never knew him. I found out who he was just a couple years ago. I moved to Kewanee in 1984. He died in 1985. But I do have a long list of cousins, and I also met several of them last Saturday as well when I was in Chicago. And I told a friend of mine, yeah, I've got from ex-cons to cops to college professors, and they're in everyone's family.
And they still like to be a Republican?
Hey, I started out as a Democrat. But the kids do not, we need to do things for these kids. I know a tragic story of a young man in Davenport. He's got 13 kids. different women, not taking care of any of them. We as black men, we have to stand up and do something and show these kids, no, you don't have to run that route. 2 of his boys are in jail in Scott County Jail right now. But it's, I compliment you on what you're doing. I'm proud of you.
Well, I'm going to compliment him one more time as we close this out. Really just to credit him with the question, I think when we were planning this, and the question was about, okay, well, we know that there have been these cities with things that have happened that have kind of created bad reputations or at least some bad publicity. And that was kind of the kernel of it. And I think it was really to Tad's question, which was like, hey, we're trying to turn a lot of that around. And now the big question for us as a community is how do we sustain positive civic momentum? And so I think we had a great talk about this, all of us, before his, but I really would like to get, as we close out, just to go around and have people just say something about what you think the key is. What's the key to sustaining positive civic momentum in your own community?
Being active in your community. And as Tad said, be about it. You see something out there that needs to be done, do something about it. Don't just simply sit back and complain and say, well, they're doing this and they're doing that. If you're not making some actions to change it, you don't need to say anything. May as well just be silent.
Great, thank you. Molly, feel free to speak either personally or with the communities you see.
No, thank you for having me here. These are awesome people, all of you. You know, and this is just like a little side note about my life. I'm married to the mayor of Murfreesboro, so I don't cover the town of Murfreesboro. But, like, it's interesting. Yeah.
Very wise.
Because I was going to investigate the laundry situation. It's like totally out of control. But there's another reporter that does all the hard-hitting news. But, you know, I think about this and it's funny. We started, of course, dating first and we got married and we come home and we have very different roles and I'm definitely probably, more out highlighting some things like the systemic issues you talk about. I don't like to call it negative news, but I get that some people feel that way. I understand what it is. And, he's out on the other side of things, like trying to, not that like he's naive about Murfreesboro's problems. And Murfreesboro is a town with a tiny economy and, lots of cute little Christmas festivals and also lots of poverty and hard things like, but he's of course the cheerleader. Like these are different roles. Like, the folks that are in, mayors and county boards. I mean, if your mayor or your county board chairman is like, oh, this just really sucks here. Like, what? I mean, that's totally bizarre, right? Like everyone's punching Santa Claus. Like, and so you want your officials. I think that's good. Like, officials should be overly optimistic, and journalists should be a little bit more skeptical, right? That doesn't mean like one is right and one is wrong. I think these are just very different roles. Those roles that are very different, like, were super highlighted to me in a really intimate way when I got, married to a public official. I think it brings balance to myself and what it's easy to, you want to run in and be like, oh, you're failing this town or whatever, when I see how hard my husband works to get the smallest business to open, and so I also just, another thing I wanted to add was, as we were sitting here talking, I feel like there's also like a lot of, people are so concerned about how their own stories are being told in their communities that we have, especially maybe in Illinois, like because things have been sort of troubled at the state level and, we're like kind of in competition to not necessarily be the best, which was what you see in a thriving community. Like our community is so much better than this one. We're like in a competition not to be the worst. I think that's really damaging. It's like, yeah, things are bad here, but have you been to, over here? Like, I don't get that because I think so much of what is happening in our communities, again, it's not about like individual failings. I mean, yes, local management matters. Good local management absolutely matters. I'm not saying it doesn't, but just because one town gets a success doesn't mean that every other town's mayors are idiots. And just because your town struggles and can't pull off the impossible doesn't mean, that all of these officials are idiots. And so I have all these struggling things that go on. Like, I think we have to tell the positive stories, but don't make it seem like it's because these folks are just geniuses and everyone else in all of these counties are stupid or something, like, and they can't figure it out. Because I think that's what the government, I think the government is gaslighting us all sometimes, and they sort of want you to think like it's all local failing. when if we really all start to stitch together, we're all sitting here telling the same stories. You know how many communities I am in hearing people talk about their school districts and how they just want to get these positive stories out there, but there's these other real problems going on, the public housing, whatever it is. This is like not just in Illinois, but this is like the common story of middle America. It's not rural and urban divide, it's people who have nothing. And so when you have nothing, you feel like fighting each other instead of fighting for, against the policies that are hurting your communities. And I think, there's just, these are big things going on, and I don't know how to solve them, but I think that, sharing the commonalities versus having divides and talking about divides is important to creating solutions, because you're never gonna have the federal or state government, most likely they're not gonna come in with a solution for Alton or for Decatur. But if it's the entire downstate Illinois, suffering economically, well then we have to start coming up with a solution for several million people. Because the government doesn't come up with solutions for a town, but they might if it's a region. So anyway.
So look beyond even your own city when you're thinking about these.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
I would say to maintain and sustain the momentum and keep things going is by investing. It's all about what we invest in. And I feel like it's our job to invest in the kids. I know we do a lot of these meetings and stuff for the future generation without involving the young people. The things that I see that will definitely progress everything that we're doing as a community is by investing in the young people, by being a champion for the kids and a mentor. It doesn't take much. I know we have crazy busy schedules, I know I do. It's just by showing up to lunch, or just when I visit my daughter in class, Kate with all the kids, It's just by being present and inviting them to like movies or something. You never know that one moment that you spend with the young people and invest in them, not by preaching to them, just by being there. It'll change their trajectory immensely. So I feel like investing in the young people more, is the key. Because once we get them proud about where they're from and who they are, and you build confidence in them, they'll achieve greatness. They'll be proud to be in Decatur, to be in the school district, because we're proud to be, and we're proud of them. So it's up to us to be the image for the young people that's going to, make it even bigger and better. So I feel like sometimes as adults we try to cater to other adults and stuff, but we don't include the young people, the generation that will be forcefully having to give the baton to, and like I said on my show, at the end of my show, I said, turn your cans into cans and your dreams into plans. So don't talk about it, be about it, and for us not to wait for somebody to come save us. You put the S on your chest, the cape on your back, and you save your own day. Don't wait for somebody to come and save it for you. So that's what I do.
Thank you so much,
You're
Darren.
welcome.
Sarah.
I have to say, I just feel so very fortunate that I get to work toward improving the quality of life in my community as a career. I mean, through that, I get to meet and get to know so many people and hear their stories. And I find that I just inherently feel like it is my responsibility and an honor to share any privileges that I have and any resources that I have with other people who might not have those available to them. So one thing that we get asked all the time, how are we going to keep the momentum of the small business revolution going? Don't let that be a flash in the pan. How do you keep it going? And one thing that we thought to do is, 6 businesses got chosen, but there are hundreds of other businesses in Alton that are equally awesome that did not get chosen. So we created a photo album on our Facebook page. When we voted, it was #MyAlton. That's how everybody had to get the votes in. And that evolved into Our Alton because we started to just come together as a community and tell that story. So we created the Our Alton profiles, and we've been having questionnaires sent to every locally owned business in town, asking them to submit a photograph of themselves about what they do for their business and what they aspire to do, 5 or 10 years from now. So we are taking this opportunity that we have and we are extending it to as many people as we can. And we just find as many ways that we can do that as possible. If you just wrap our arms around everybody, it does not help anybody to hoard your resources to yourself. Share them and they'll multiply.
John, close us out.
I'm a big believer that community development, economic development work is not a destination, it's a journey. Like, it's never done. So at some point, I will turn the baton over to somebody else. We have to make way for other people to be part of the work. We don't have all the good ideas. We don't, have the, total control of what's going to be done. We just do it in the moment that we're gifted with the opportunity. But in terms of how to sustain the momentum, I guess for me in my community right now, I'm a big believer in visual cues. That we have to visually show that things are different. And I really got to compliment the folks here from Decatur. Driving in, I saw a clean community that valued art and valued public spaces. And that tells me something about who you want to be and not who you were. Who you are becoming more and more every day. So, locally, in terms of how we're trying to sustain or increase the momentum, we're working on public art and beautification and placemaking and turning placemaking into place marketing. I'm also a big believer in, I love it when people talk about the kids, but dang it, I want to live in a good place. Like, I want to leave my place to my kids and it'll be better, but I got a lot of life to live, and I just want it to be cool for my next 40 or so years, whatever I'm gifted with. So I'm gonna have fun with my kids, and we're gonna have fun together, and hopefully we leave it to the next generation to continue the work because it's a journey, not a destination.
All right, well, I want to say Marshall, Molly, Tat, Sarah, John, thank you all so much for being such wonderful, insightful panelists for this discussion. I really appreciate it. And a thank you to Matt and to Paul DeRica and Elliot from Illinois Humanities. And Matt, you want
Could, if y'all are open to it, can I ask a couple questions?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks. And this will indicate my sort of rural studies interest. One question for Molly, another question for Marshall. Molly, as someone who is from a rural community in the Shawnee Hills, a sort of, kind of upland southern region, and also reports on that region and, social and economic conditions there and so forth. I'm just wondering if you followed any of the kind of debate that's been happening about this book called Hillbilly Elegy and all of the sort of rebuttals that have been written, in response to it, and this notion that Hillbilly Elegy kind of represents the single story, so to speak, and that it needs to be taken seriously, but other stories need to be told. And then my question for Marshall is, the way that we actually found out about who you are, Marshall, is that the Chicago Tribune and some other news outlets have produced a number of articles about Henry County as an example of a place that President Obama won in both of his elections, but then President Trump won in the most recent election. And this whole sort of Trump country article or feature article kind of thing has almost become a genre unto itself. There have been all of these articles, in which reporters have gone to places that had voted for President Obama, but then voted for President Trump. So I guess I'm just wondering about how people in Henry County feel about the fact that they're getting attention for that reason, and how they feel about the coverage. Do they feel that the county is being represented fairly and accurately and comprehensively?
Well, I was trying to pass out.
big question. I haven't read the book. I believe it's about the Appalachian Mountain region and looking at some of the ills of poverty that have taken deep root, right? Am I correct here? And then some others have challenged back and said, yeah, but that's not the whole thing. There's beautiful community here. Rural life is worth preserving. Am I getting this right, Matt?
Yes.
Generally speaking. Okay. So a common thing we hear. I read a blog called the Rural Blog. If you don't read it, it's worth getting on there occasionally. They had a post the other day. I thought it was sort of enlightening about this topic, and it was looking at two national columns that had recently been written. I believe both in the New York Times, was sort of and talking about the opposing views that can exist. Oftentimes people talk about rural America and this sort of Pollyanna, like, oh, the country folk, they make apple pies and they're so nice and like they wave at everyone, and it's all so true, right? And they're so simple, but like you really love them, you kind of want to hug them. Like they kind of make like caricatures out of people. And then on the other hand, there's the narrative like this, like, oh my God, everything is awful and like people are starving, the whole. So it's one side or the other. It's either there's nothing we can do, we have to move everyone out of the country, or it's, wow, these people are so awesome and perfect. Like, and then it's kind of like, well, why would we need to help them? They're like literally the most perfect human ever because they're so special and warm and fuzzy. And I don't know that either are helpful. I will say, like, I can't get myself real worked up about criticizing like whether one author who tells a really probably good story that enlightens a lot of people should be like somehow held responsible for like the entire narrative. I think that's sort of short-sighted. Like, hey, if an author tells a good story, like they're just one person telling one story. If you want to go tell another story, like, write another story. I feel like there's a little bit of that. That's how I feel a lot about like the criticisms of the national media coming into a town. I mean, I get it, but I also think it's, people asking for something that's pretty hard to deliver, which is that you're supposed to tell, like, and enlighten people on a really difficult situation, but also maybe come in and write another book that's like, everything is baked potatoes here. I don't know. So I don't know what I'm saying other than, I think that the ills of rural poverty, just like the ills and of urban poverty and neglect are very similar, and people act like we're so different, but I mean, we may vote for different people, and like it's, people and the problems they deal with get sort of put into these lights of like the Donald Trump and the Hillary Clinton, or the city and the urban dwellers, or whatever, but really like when you get into somebody's home, you talked about the businesses not locating because of the drug problem. I mean, that's happening in Southern Illinois in a really big way. Like, I think, these questions are, I don't know how to answer them, but I mean, I definitely think that pretending that these things aren't incredibly devastating to communities isn't helpful in any way. And oftentimes, not always, but often people who are challenging back saying, yeah, well, that's not the entire story, aren't the people who are the most disadvantaged in the disadvantaged communities. So you can be in a rural community and have wealth. And so a lot of times you're like, well, that's not my story. And that's fine. I agree, we should tell your story. But when you're talking about 50, 60, 70, 80% of a county living in extreme poverty, well, their reality, I mean, we're talking, Southern Illinois got 3 and 4 times the child abuse rates. I mean, and we have the drug problem and the businesses not locating because people are dropping out of the workforce and all of these things that to me should be extremely alarming. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but I mean, Southern Illinois is basically at the crossroads of the Mississippi Delta and the Appalachian Mountains, sort of region, one coming down the Ohio River area and one coming up the Mississippi Delta. We're sort of in the middle of all that, so we're seeing a lot of the same effects. I don't know the answer, but I mean, that's not to say I think Southern Illinois is beautiful and we're saving. I will, but the things that are happening inside families are very real and very tough. And just because they're not happening inside your family doesn't mean that, something better shouldn't be for those folks, whether it's helping them where they are or coming to terms with the fact that this area or some of these areas may not provide what these families need, and coming up with solutions to help them relocate.
Okay, we did have a Federal Record Tribune came down And he talked to several people throughout the community because of the swing from Obama to Trump. Finally, a lawyer in Cambridge gave him my name, asked him to contact me. Once again, I'm the anomaly there. So he came, and we talked for quite some time. And I read over the articles that Ted wrote, and they were accurate. I've had, I know you wouldn't do this, some reporters ask me questions and interview me, and later, when I read the article, I wondered, well, who wrote this? Who was she talking to? But he came down twice. The first time, and he had asked me, well, he came out to, well, asked me if I voted for Trump. And I said, well, I could not vote for Hillary Clinton, but I couldn't vote for Trump either. The reason being his speech, the things that he was saying. But I also said after his inauguration speech that I hope that he would do the things that he said he would do. I still have a big problem with him tweeting all the time. If someone says something to you, if someone insults you, so what? You got better things to do, bigger fish to fry, so to speak. But I do. He has done some good things. We had been promising Israel for years we were going to move our embassy to Jerusalem. But we finally came through on that promise. The tax cuts, well, there were tax cuts for the rich. Well, it also affected the poor as well. I heard one thing saying, one article was saying that the tax refunds would be smaller. Well, reasonably, they should be smaller if they're taking less out of your check. You won't get as much back. And I just like for us to step back, take a breath, and look at the actions. Now, are there things that he has done and said that I disagree with? Indeed, there are. I think people should be treated with respect, talked to with respect. Henry County as a whole, they were looking at 8 years of hard times, basically. When President Obama came in, he hit it just right, just when the bottom was falling out of the market, people were losing jobs, and it was tough. I'm not sure if some of his policies, I'm not sure if they actually helped us or not. But those were his policies. Let it go at that. But by and large, on the second series of interviews that Ted came out and had with the community, there were some folks that were saying, well, we're not sure if we'll vote for him next election or not. I'm still on the fence there. I'm still looking for more evidence. What has he done? There are many negative stories about him. Are they true? Where's the evidence behind that? Where are they leading? But we do have 7.6 million jobs that are available, open now. Job seekers are looking for 7.6 million people to fill those jobs. Unemployment is lower than it has been in quite some time. And even some of the older folks are going back out and getting jobs. So there's some good, there's some bad. We have to take it together and weigh it and measure it. And I think we also just need to just back up a little bit and just try to make things work for our country instead of fighting. I think that we seem to have two groups in our country. that are intent on having us at war with one another. You listen to one side and everything is that the Republicans do is bad, and then you listen to the other side, everything that the Democrats do is bad. I haven't found that to be the case in my life, that any one group is totally bad. No, you got bad in both. You got good in both. Let's work on the good and work for the good of our country. Thank you.
All right, let's